very happy to introduce N R Daws again, who is joining us for our author chat tonight. And you're going to start us off with an intro to you and your books.
An intro to me and my books.
Yes, please.
Right. So yeah, I am Neil Daws, and I write as N R Daws, and I came to writing crime stories via trying to get a thriller or spy thriller through the slush pile, and that didn't work. So I turned to crime, as they say. And the first one was A Quiet Place to Kill, which is set in a quiet village called Scotney in the middle of Kent and near an RAF air station. It's in World War II, and it's a detective called Jonathan Kemba who meets a woman called Elizabeth Hayes, or Lizzie Hayes, who's an air transport auxiliary pilot ferrying warplanes around for the RAF. There's a murder in the village, and she brings her background of being a PhD in psychology. PhD in psychology and having criminology in her research background. And she tries to convince both Jonathan Kemba and everyone on the airbase and everyone who will listen that she's got the skills to try and solve this murder and help catch the killer. Silent Way to Die, the second one, is in the same vein, but some of it takes place off the air station in Chatham Dockyard, where there's another murder. But it's them both of them this time facing not just misogyny and all that kind of thing, but red tape from both their bosses and from the higher ups in the RAF, trying to stop them doing their job, really.
You had an interesting inspiration for the story. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your inspiration? Or the lady who inspired it a bit?
Inspiration for stories. Excuse me. Well, as I said, I came to crime via thrillers, and because that wasn't getting through, I decided that I would look at crime, but I didn't want to do something contemporary, because my father had always been interested in the Second World War. He'd taken me to lots of museums all over the southeast and London, and we went to places like HMS Belfast, and when we went on holiday to the Isle of Wight, there's a gun emplacement there on Culver Cliffs, and he took me to there. So I saw all these things all over the southeast, and I thought it would be a good idea to set a crime story in the Second World War. And I chose the Battle of Britain because it was a time of upheaval and change, and the start of what was going to be a crime wave, actually, in Britain during the blackout. And one of the characters came from the spy story, which was Jonathan Kemba. He was originally an MI5 officer in my original story, and he had a different name actually in the crime book. But when that name was queried by a writing group I was in, I decided to revert back to that name, and I liked that name anyway. It was one that I'd spent some time over. So he became Jonathan Kemba, and I wanted him to be someone with the requisite skills to solve the most heinous of crimes, but also someone who was perhaps a bit of an outsider himself. So I made him a seconded Scotland Yard officer. Seconded because there's something in his background, in his life in the Met Police, that has caused his bosses to move him sideways, shall we say. So he goes down to Tunbridge, and eventually when he meets up with Elizabeth Hayes, she was nothing to do with the spy story, but I needed a foil for Kemba, and I didn't want the usual kind of Mawson Lewis kind of buddy thing. So, but I didn't want the kind of Dempsey and Makepeace thing either. I wanted them for them to have a little bit of be a bit antagonistic to each other to start with, but then once they knew what each other's skills were, they would then actually become to respect each other and get closer and be able to solve the crime. And the inspiration for Lizzie came from a real air transport auxiliary pilot called Joy Lofthouse. My mother-in-law But I'd seen a cutting in the newspaper, which was to do with the female Top Guns, which was all the women that were flying Tornado fast jets in Afghanistan and places like that. I thought, oh, there's going to be an interesting story there sometime. But then my mother-in-law knew that I had that, and she gave me a cutting from her magazine, her woman's magazine, Woman's Own or something like that. And it was to do with Joy Lofthouse and the Air Transport Auxiliary. So I knew nothing about her, Googled her, and she happened to be appearing in Shoreham near Orpington. There was a little museum there, a Battle of Britain museum. So I went along, and she was signing books and paintings. And in fact, that painting there is one that she signed for me. And that's of her when she was in the Air Transport Auxiliary. But when I met her, she was 93. I let everybody else ask their questions and have their books signed. And then I managed to sit with her for half an hour at the end. And she was a wonderful character. There was a sparkle in her eyes that was kind of young girlish again, saying, talking about her time. And one story she said was that I was asking about misogyny and sexism and thinking that might be an angle for my story, or one angle for my story. So she said no, she didn't experience much of that at the time she came to it in 1943 when she was about 20. But what happens was that if the aircraft was damaged in some way that she was taking back to a factory, or if there was some kind of weather issue, or there were bandits about and she had to land quickly, and she had the choice between an RAF air station and an American air base, she deliberately chose the American air base, because at the RAF station she would get tea and biscuits and then told to be on her way as soon as she could. At the American air base, she would get a warm welcome, tea, chocolates, stockings, asked to stay over, and just generally get a better reception, because the Americans had everything that the RAF air station couldn't offer. And so I thought that's the kind of character I want Lizzie to be, someone who's at least an equal to my detective.
That's cool. Very interesting. It makes sense. My dad said when he was in the army, like the American army always had better rations.
Yeah, well, that's what she said. They had everything that the RAF station didn't have. More and more supplies were coming into the country when the Americans arrived, but everything still either had to come via air, via Greenland, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, and then down through Scotland, or come across on the convoys. And the German U-boats were still heavily infesting the Atlantic waters. So anything that they could get, they lapped up. But obviously, the Americans bring in the vast quantity of all the luxury goods, went to the American air bases and the army bases.
Sam has said the research for these books must be fascinating. What have you enjoyed learning about?
What have I enjoyed learning? Everything, really. I've been, as I said, I've been to places like the Imperial War Museum and HMS Belfast, but I met a chap called Clive Holden, who was running a tour in the tunnels beneath Rochester. And it's the air raid tunnels and the factory tunnels that the Shorts brothers used to escape the bombing and to continue to build their Short Sunderland flying boats, which they tested and launched along the strip of Medway River there. And I'd never seen those tunnels before. I knew they existed, but he was running a tour, so I went on that. So I learned a lot more about how you could run an aircraft factory underground, which is what the Germans were doing in the latter part of the war. Everything went underground for them because we were bombing the hell out of everything that was above ground. Otherwise, it's meeting people at living history fairs. So places like Chatham Dockyard has Salute to the 40s every September, I think. The Kent and East Sussex Light Railway at Tenterden run the 1940s weekend. And when you go to those places, you meet up with other enthusiasts, the people that dress up in the costumes and have all the vehicles and the weapons and the gun and the tools. And I mean, that's one of the places. I haven't used it in a book yet, but there was an auxiliary fire service fireman, and he had this particular axe, and I thought, well, that's an interesting looking axe. What's all that for? And he said, well, the end of it is rubber, so that when they hacked their ways into buildings, they wouldn't get electrocuted by all the wires that were exposed. And I thought, well, yeah, of course, you would, wouldn't you? But I didn't know that, and so that's another little snippet that's gone into the book somewhere, into the notes. So it's anything new, really, that comes up that I'm interested in, because if I haven't noticed it before, then it's interesting to jot down, maybe for future reference.
I think you've got quite a love of planes as well, though, haven't you? I picked that up when we were talking about the promo. Seem very keen to learn all about the different types of planes and things.
Yes. Well, again, going back to my father, he was a great lover of the Spitfire. He was all, whenever we went to Biggin Hill Airfair, the Spitfire was always the one he looked out for. And if there was one on the ground, it was always the one he headed for first. Now, although I do like a Spitfire, I'm rather partial to a plane called a Mosquito, a twin-engine fighter, bomber, everything really. I've even got the theme to 633 Squadron as my ringtone on my phone. And so he took me to that. He took me to the Hendon Aircraft Museum and introduced me to things like the Lancaster bomber. And of course, being a child of the 60s and then growing up into the 70s, Airfix model kits were the thing to do. And I made every aircraft that they had. If a new one came out, that's the one I wanted. And I got quite adept at making them. And in fact, just behind me there, up there, that's a model of a V1 flying bomb model kit. So I tried to put as much of that in as the backdrop as I don't want it to overpower the crime story, but I put it in as to flavour it. And so there's Spitfires and Hurricanes in the books. Later on, there will be other different kind of aircraft. And there's one story that I'm working on that involves a DC-3 or a C-47 Dakota, which was one of the workhorses of the war, a twin-engine transport plane. And this story involves Lizzie having to fly this plane with a group of people on board, including Jonathan Kemba. I won't say much more about the story of that, but because the first half of the story takes place, or a large part of the first half takes place on board, I need to know, or I think I need to know, maybe everything that I know won't go into the book, but if I know it, I know that I can sprinkle it into the book. So I'll need to know, like which side the pilot sat on, what the controls looked like, what it felt like to sit in one of those bucket seats, what it felt like to sit along the seats at the side, what it smelt like. I know what the smell of an aero engine smells like, because I was very fortunate to fly in a Spitfire. I think it was 2 years ago now. My family, I'd spent my money on a writing course, and my family clubbed together and said, well, you want to go on this thing, so go and fly it. So I did. And so I got the smell and the feel and the vibration. But I can't remember the name of the airfield now, but there's a museum in Lincolnshire which has a Dakota in a hangar, and you can actually go inside it. Most museums won't let you inside their aircraft. But this one, you can go in, you can sit down, and you can spend time in there and just soak up the atmosphere and the smell of it. And that. Hopefully, some of that will make its way into the story.
So you're going to plan a trip to Lincolnshire then, or back to Lincolnshire, because isn't that where you're from?
No, I'm not from Lincolnshire. I'm from South Croydon. No, not South Croydon. I'm from Croydon, South London. I lived there for 30 years before I moved down to Rochester. Down here with my wife, started a family down here. We went to Chatham first, then we moved across to Rochester. But yes, definitely I will be coming up to Lincolnshire for that particular museum. If funds permit, and if my wife permits, I've been to Iceland once for the Northern Lights, but I'd like to go back and look at the airfield, and some of the air defences are still there. And, although the story at the moment doesn't demand that goes into it, it would be nice to know where things were so that certain scenes could possibly take place there. It's nice to know the the outline of where you're writing about, either by Google Maps or Google Earth, Google Street View, getting maps out, physical maps out. But I do like to go and visit these places just to see what it's like. So yeah,
And a good excuse for a trip, isn't it? It's a good excuse for a trip that you're
it is a good excuse for a trip, yes. And Iceland's a lovely place. I only went to Reykjavik. I did the kind of usual tour around to the waterfalls and the geyser and the Blue Lagoon. But I took my daughter there for the Northern Lights. But yeah, I'd love to go back just because it's a lovely place to be, but also because there's that little bit of history. Because, most people won't know that the British invaded Iceland, pretty much. They wanted to be neutral, but because they were part of Denmark at the time, they were deemed to be vulnerable. The Germans invaded Denmark. Iceland's part of Denmark, so the next step was Iceland. So the British invaded, held it for, I can't remember how long now, probably only about a year, I think. Somebody will tell me different. But then they handed it over to the Americans, mainly because they had more resources, and because then that could be the air hub for bringing in planes made in Canada. Moving aircraft production to Canada and flying those in. So yeah, interesting place to go and visit for all sorts of reasons. And I do that in mainland Europe as well. My brother, God bless him, he's a long-suffering brother. He comes with me on a number of trips to places like Peenemünde, which is where the V1 and V2s were first developed, down to a place called Haigerloch, which is near Munich, and that's the place where the Germans were developing a nuclear reactor. Didn't quite go critical, but if it had, things might have been different for the rest of the war. There's loads of V1 sites, V2 sites in Western France, obviously, because the closer to the coast, they could bombard Britain. So there's loads of bunkers and underground tunnels and interesting places to visit. There's a great museum in the middle of Calais, actually, in one of the German bunkers. So, and all around Britain as well. The southeast, there are pillboxes and gun emplacements and tank traps. Even in the south, the Royal Military Canal was built, I think in Napoleonic times, I can't remember now. But that was kind of to be a water barrier. So there's lots of military history all around Kent and Sussex and in South London, in the middle of London. And it's all fascinating stuff. And, being somebody who likes research, I have to try and kind of rein it in a little bit. Otherwise, it becomes just a textbook.
What has the reception been like to the series so far? Because you've got 2 out of 3 books out.
Yeah, so A Quiet Place to Kill came out almost a year ago, 1st of September last year. And it's got, I can't remember how many reviews on Amazon, but quite a number. And it's got 4-star average. And a lot of the comments have been very positive. Obviously, you get the 1-star ones that really rubbish you, and you think, oh my God, why the hell did I write the thing in the first place? But most of the others have been very positive, and I've been to a few festivals now. Appeared at Crime Fest in Bristol. That went down quite well. And met people at Harrogate, and they're coming up and saying, oh, I read your book, and that's, they really enjoyed it, and looking forward to reading number 2 that's just come out. And that was the second one came out 26th of April and is doing steady business as well. So I'm hoping that when the next one comes out in, I think it's February next year, which should tie in with the Faversham Literary Festival, if I can wangle a spot on there. If I don't, I'll still go along to it because it's one of my local festivals. But yeah, the whole series has been really well received because it's. I mean, my agent said that it's and the publisher said it's a slightly different angle in that it is a detective and a amateur sleuth kind of partnership, but behind it is all the difficulties they have in doing their jobs and doing it together. Especially Lizzie, who, I mean, the Air Transport Auxiliary, for people who don't know, was mainly men at the start, and it was called Ancient and Tattered Airmen because they flew planes with one eye. There was a guy, obviously with one or no legs, like Douglas Bader did, but there was one guy I read about had one arm, and he used to fly planes like that. And he used to grip the stick between his knees and use his good hand on the throttle. Now, horrendous thing to do. Especially if you're going to be, the potential at that time for being attacked by German bandits from all over the place. So the reasoning behind not having women fly the airplanes was stupid. Like, oh, they're going to break our airplanes and they're expensive. It's that kind of attitude that I wanted Lizzie to come up against. And they had to prove them time and time again. And at the beginning of A Quiet Place to Kill, they've just been assigned to this airbase at Scotney, but it's not long after the first 8 women were allowed to fly. And they were only allowed to fly very, very tiny planes like tiger moths, double-wing biplanes, and the very slow monoplanes, training planes. And it's only after being pushed and the amount of planes that were needed, they needed more people to fly. So in the end, they had to relent. There ended up, I think, I can't remember now, 14 or 15 ferry pools. Some were mixed in the end, and a couple were purely women. But it took a long time, even shortly after book 2 and before the events that will be book 3 come out. They were allowed to start flying Spitfires and Hurricanes, but it still then took another few months or a while to allow them to fly the bigger planes and the bombers. And even on the 4-engine bombers, they had to have a man with them. That supposedly was a flight engineer to enable them to operate certain bits of machinery inside the aircraft, but it was really because they didn't trust them with the big things, and they never let them fly a flying boat. So yeah, but that was the kind of another reason behind the books, and that aspect of it seems to have gone down well with both men and women readers, which is encouraging.
I think even still in kind of airlines today, there are not that many kind of female pilots and or female crew.
Yeah, no, there aren't. Just a moment. I should put the power on before it goes dark. Yeah, female airline pilots. When the war ended, like it did at the end of the First World War, they just said to the women, right, okay, go back home now. You've done in the factories. Thank you very much. They couldn't do it quite as much as they'd hoped because so many men had been lost in the Great War that they had to relent and let women stay on in a number of roles in factories and other places. In the Second World War, it was no different. As soon as the war was over, having not lost quite as many troops as in that same period in the First World War, they they said, right, okay, go back to your houses. We're done now. Your housewives and things. But women had got the taste for it then. They'd seen that they were useful. They knew they were useful, and actually the men knew they were useful as well. But it was just a case of some of the old diehards and the stick in the muds and the misogynists just said, "You can't be doing this. This is man's work." So a number of pilots then. I think it was Jackie Soror who became Jackie Muggeridge, who's some of her aspects have gone into Lizzie as well. I think she went abroad and did some work there with her husband. And there was one pilot, I'm not sure whether it's Mary Ellis, ATA pilot. She managed to be able to, I think she was the first woman to fly a jet fighter. But she was never allowed to fly in the RAF. They still weren't allowed in the RAF to fly. These women had been flying all over Europe before the war. They were in flying circuses. They were in air shows, and they were flipping planes around like the ones you see now. They kind of spin these things and flip them upside down and do barrel rolls and all sorts of things. Doing things with an aircraft that you wouldn't think that it would be capable of or should be doing. And they were doing that back in the 30s in these shows, and they were flying all over Europe. And obviously these were the richer women or women in rich families. So daddy would buy them an aeroplane, or they'd hop in their brother's one or whatever. But eventually, they were seen to be good at what they did, and it was a draw for the crowds. And they did little trips, sightseeing trips as the pilots, and nobody seemed to mind then. But it was only kind of the establishment, the RAF, who said, no, you can't be doing this. Even though you've been doing this for the last however many years, 5, 10, 15 years, we still think you're going to break our aeroplane. So when the war ended, they still didn't want them there and said, okay, you've done a fantastic job. And I think it was only in recent years that they've got medals and been able to take part in the cenotaph parade. Just an aside, if you ever get to Whitehall and see the cenotaph, not far along the same road is a fantastic memorial to all the women who took part in the Second World War, but without doing a statue with faces on. What it is basically lots of little coat hangers, and on each coat peg, and on each coat peg is a different uniform for the different branches. So Auxiliary Fire Service, ATS, the Wrens, the ATA, anything you can think of that an organisation that a woman took part in, their uniform is hanging up there, which I think is a great way of maybe it's a cop out in putting one statue or one memorial, but I think it encompasses everything that they put into it alongside the men. So it's a bit of a shame that people like Mary Ellis was the only one who managed to fly jet fighters. Others tried to get into pilots' jobs. I think maybe one or two managed it for a while, but only for small airlines or for sightseeing. The big commercial airlines didn't want to know, because it was the same attitude of, you're going to break our aeroplane, which is a shame.
So what have you got planned after you finish the series?
More of the same, I hope. I mean, that entirely depends on the publisher and how book 3 is received. But there are 3 synopses that I've submitted with plots that I think are really good and take both the story of their individual stories of Lizzie and Kemba, but also their relationship and the crime story. I think that progresses through another 3 stories. As I say, one of them set on the way to and in Iceland, another one back at the Scotney Air Base, and the third one, that's at Scotney as well, but it's a different kind of story. It's still crime, still murder, but there's only so many serial killers that you can have in one place. I mean, it's only a small village. It's not like Oxford. You know, Inspector Morse solved more crimes. I think solved more murders than there are villages in my village. So yeah, more of the same, I hope. But if not, then I've got an idea for another crime story, which is more contemporary, set over a period of a year, so with different events. So each section will be an event, but each event will be set in different months. And there's a kind of a comedy drama kind of story that I want to tell, which is about a group of men of my age, really, who go on this kind of it's a journey that they think is for somebody else. They're doing it on behalf of this person in his memory. But what is actually happening is that they're discovering themselves and getting over the grief. And so it's kind of their journey into a new period of their lives, if you like. And that's very much in the sketchy stage at the moment. But there's lots of ideas jotted down on bits of paper all over my desk that you can't see, and I'm not going to show you because it's a mess. But yeah, it'll all eventually get set up on a board, which is just over there, which is on the door, and eventually all these bits of post-it notes get shuffled into place. So that'll be. I actually quite like to write that one next, but if I don't get that second contract with the Kemba and Hayes series, then that one first, and then this other crime one, which I'm excited about because I think there's got a lot of scope in there for expanding out that I can't do in the Second World War.
What have you read this year that you've really enjoyed?
What have I read this year? That's a good question. I've been reading a lot of the books of the panelists that I was on in Crime Fest. So I liked the Twyford Code, particularly by Janice Hallett. That was excellent. The Game by Scott Kershaw, or another panelist. That was extraordinary. That was his debut, and that was a really good book. Obviously, I'm reading the ones that are on the panel for Capital Crime, which is coming up in September. But actually, I think I've got two behind me. That one, I can recommend that one, That Green-Eyed Girl by Julie Owen Moylan. It's about two women in New York in the 1950s, but also in the 1970s. So it's a kind of a dual timeline story. And it's two women that fall in love, but their story is screwed up a bit by somebody else that they meet. I won't tell you any more about that, but that's worth looking at. And one of my old Curtis Brown creative writing group people, Polygamous Lessons in Chemistry, which is being made into a series with Brie Larson, about a woman who's a scientist, loses her job, ends up being a TV star, and teaching the women of America how to be scientists and feminists at the same time. Really good book. I recommend both of those. The one I'm reading right at this moment is one of the panelists from Capital Crime, which is The Two Daves by Will Carver, which is written a completely different style to anything I've read before. A lot of characters, and each chapter is different character, and it keeps switching back between the characters, but a lot of it is written in a questioning style, so kind of questioning you as the reader. Instead of just feeding you information, it's saying, well, am I this? What am I doing? Why do I do that? Yeah, it makes you think, that one, so that's interesting. So any one of those I would recommend.
Yeah, my Lessons in Chemistry is my read of the year so far.
Yeah. As I say, she was in the Curtis Brown group that I was in. There was after I retired from my job, I thought I would go straight into writing, but my mum had cancer and eventually died of it that year. So my writing ambitions were put on hold. But then I thought Val McDermott, she writes January, February, March, maybe April, edits a bit, then does things the rest of the year. I thought I'll try that. I'll see if I can write a book that quickly in 3 months or 4 months. And that's when I wrote A Quiet Place to Kill. Took another year and a half or 2 years to hone it and edit it and think it was good enough to send out to anyone. Got some good feedback, but still wasn't getting anywhere. So then I joined this group, which I know that a lot of authors and a lot of people don't like the idea that you go to a writing group, pay for it, because if you've got the talent, you should be able to do it without. And yes, you should. But for somebody who's kind of struggling with something and can't see the wood for the trees, I think at the very least, going to a reading group, a writing group, gives you feedback on your own writing. And in this one, there were industry professionals, there were other like-minded people. We were all at kind of the same or similar stage of writing. And there was 15 on this course, and I think about 7 of us have got contracts, and 3 or 4 of us have already been published. So it clearly works. And we didn't. Well, I think only one of us got. No, maybe 2 of us got a contract with Curtis Brown. The others have gone elsewhere. So it's not a case that you get picked up by the agency that you're having the course with. But I've heard good things about the Faber Academy as well, and other writing groups. I can't remember what it's called now. There's a writing course up north. I can't remember. But anyway, so from that, my peer group there said, "Why don't you send it off to the Blue Pencil Agency competition?" I'd seen it. I put it around on our WhatsApp group, and I said, "Well, why don't you do it?" So I did, not thinking that I would get anywhere, but hoping that there might be some feedback at the end of it. And I got highly commended, 3rd. That one of the judges on that was Nell Andrew, and she called me into the office and talked about the book. Then she told me a lot about herself, which I knew a bit about anyway, because the moment she said come and see me, I googled the hell out of it and found some videos of her, and I thought, actually, this is an agent who was on my list of people to talk to. And after that discussion, she said, "Well, if you're happy, I'll represent you." And I said, "Well, I'm very happy for you to represent me." So Lessons in Chemistry came out of that group. The Beekeeper by Saya Tarabi. There's a new guy coming out next year, Elliot Sweeney. He's another one of my group. And they're all fantastic. They're all diverse books, but they're all fantastic books. And it's all because this group, and we're still in contact with each other by WhatsApp. We encourage each other. If somebody has a bit of issue with publication or not getting an agent or not getting feedback, and everyone piles in with support. We used to meet up in Waterstones in Piccadilly after our course, and we still do occasionally. Because we were quite scattered around the southeast, we came together for the course, but we're still in contact. I mean, one of us has gone to America now, but we still hear about him occasionally. And it's very encouraging to have that group and to know that those people went through what you went through. And so when you're asking a question or saying, "Can somebody read this paragraph and tell me if you think it's working or not?" you know that they're going to give you absolutely solid feedback. They're not going to pull any punches, but they're not going to be nasty about it, and they're going to give you some constructive criticism as well. It's invaluable.
Tell us a little bit more about your panel at Capital Crime.
Capital Crime, yes. As I said, Will Carver is on that one. Greg Moss, who I met at Creative Thursday at Harrogate a few weeks ago. He's going to be there. That's the husband of Kate Moss. Who are the other 2? Imran Mahmood he's going to be there, and I should remember the fourth one, but I can't. But it's all going to be about how we put our characters under pressure and the psychology, I think, of turning the screw against somebody and seeing how they react. And I know that Greg is the participating moderator, and he was a great teacher, tutor, and speaker at Harrogate. First time I'd met him, and I read the sample booklet that was in the tote bag that we got. And as soon as I've read Will's book, I'm going to read Greg's, because this is a very intriguing story. But I've only got the two books out at the moment. Others are there. Greg, I think it's his first one that's coming out either later in the year or next year. But I've got an advanced copy of that to read. The other two have got more books under their belt, but we've all got different experiences, and so I think that whatever the questions are from Greg, we've all got a different aspect, a different experience to bring to the answers, which I hope, like other panels I've seen, that we start to spark off each other and to ask each other questions rather than just leaving it to the moderator, as I'm just now leaving it to you now.
Tony Kent is the other person on your panel.
Tony Kent, yes. Oh God, how can I forget Tony? Yeah, the barrister. Yeah, he's got quite a number of books on it. Actually, I've got another one of his in there I need to read as well. But yes, I met all but Imran. I haven't met Imran, but I met the other three at Harrogate and had a chat with them just to introduce myself. And very nice blokes, very easygoing. So it should be a nice, fun, easygoing panel, and hopefully informative to the viewers as well.
Yeah, you should keep an eye out and say hi to Sam. She's moderating a panel there. Sam's our my partner in crime, like our other the other author chat host.
I'll look out for her and go and say hi. You're not going to be there?
I am not, mostly because I will probably be at work for a large part of it.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to it. My first one, as I say, was Crime Fest, and I was very nervous about doing that. I've just seen that. So I love my partner in crime. It's just popped up there. I was very nervous before the panel at Crime Fest, because it was the first one I did. But I met a couple of people there who were very encouraging and said that they would kind of give me a thumbs up if things were going well. And I'm going to credit those or acknowledge them in book 3, just to say, well, thank you for helping me through my first ever panel. I can't actually remember a lot about what I said, because it was like rabbit in the headlights. I was listening to the other panelists. I can remember what they said, but I can't remember for the life of me what I said. Except for one story about somebody I met once, but it was it was a hair-raising experience, but one that I came away from buzzing, and my fellow panelists thought it was a good panel as well, and the people in the audience were going, the people that I was relying on to tell me whether it's good or not were going, yeah, that's okay. But then this one, so not so nervous now. As you can tell, babbling away, as my wife says I tend to do. So hopefully that we're all chatty people on this panel. So hopefully there won't be any kind of long gaps where people have to intervene. I think it's going to be a great thing. And the more panels I do, hopefully the more adept I will be at handling them and giving out the right answers.
I think it's scarier being in your position on a panel than being the person who moderates it.
You're probably right. But Jane Schmilt, author of The Patient, was on the Crime Fest panel, but she was a participating moderator, so she got involved in the discussions as well. And on the Capital Crime panel, Greg Moss is also a participating moderator, and knowing what I know now of Greg, he won't be shy in coming forward with his own comments and throwing in his two pennyworth when he feels the need. He won't let us kind of flounder or anything. He's got his own opinions and his own book, so we're all kind of interested to see what each other's opinions are. Because I don't know whether they've been on panels together before, but this is all new to me. So any panel that I'm on, I'm grateful to be there, and I'm interested in the people I'm on with.
It's good that you're getting out and doing panels and things. It's been hard, hasn't it, for authors, I think, in the last couple of years because they've been bringing books out and there hasn't been things to go to.
No, that's right. My book came out in September, so it was kind of towards the end of the main pandemic lockdowns and things. But my book is published by Thomas and Mercer, and they are the crime imprint of Amazon Publishing. And as we all know, Amazon try and do things, or like to do things, in a slightly different way. They like targeted adverts and emails and discounted deals, which I think I'm not sure whether A Quiet Place to Kill or A Silent Way to Die is currently on a Kindle deal. It is in Australia, but they like to do things in a certain way. They don't put adverts on bus shelters or big window shop displays, but they get to a vast number of people through all their subscribers and their Kindle Unlimited clubs and first reads and all those kind of things, which I'm grateful for, because that gets, as a writer, you like the remuneration that comes with it, but you also like the fact that people are reading your stories. This is what you became an author for. This is my second career, so having people read my books and fulfill the dream that I had when I was a boy, and then life got in the way, and now I've been able to do what I want to do. That's a great feeling. But I am a little envious every now and again when I walk past the tubes, on a tube platform, and I see Kate Moss's latest book plastered all over a 6-foot billboard, and I hear other people doing book signings and things like that. I've done a couple of events at the local library, and there's a couple of independent bookshops that I'm going to see or going to speak to in Kent, hoping that they will stock the physical book. Because although you can order mine wherever you like, Waterstones, independent bookshop, they won't routinely stock it. It's getting warm now, my glasses keep sliding down. But yeah, they don't routinely stock my book. At which point I should say that Edward Gaylord, I can't remember his name now. He's credited in the back of book 3, because at the end of Crime Fest, I said, "What are you going to do with the books that are unsold?" And he said, "Oh, we'll send some of them back to the repository to be sent out elsewhere should they be needed. But I'll put a couple on the shelf." I said, "Oh, if you do put mine on the shelf, please do send me a photograph, because that will be the first time I've seen it on a physical bookshelf." And bless him, he did. He tweeted it, and it was a great thrill to actually. That's the kind of thing you want. You want an agent. You want a book deal. You want it hopefully in a bookshop. All these things are the things that come with being an author, and so to see that for the first time was great fun. Yeah.
So this leads nicely into one of our questions about that our group really likes to ask, which is, what are your most memorable moments as an author so far?
My most memorable moments as an author? That's a interesting question. I think the most memorable authory thing is the Crime Fest panel, but having Nell say, "I want to represent you," was kind of a heart-stopping moment. Yes, after all this time, after all this effort and work and heartache and rejection, somebody's actually said, "I like your work enough to want to try and sell it for you." then for her to come back and say, we've got an offer, would you like to go with this? They're two memorable moments as well. And then the first panel being on one as an author. Those three I can point to. But before that, I mean, there's a little story I've got from, I think it was might have been 2016 when I first went to Harrogate. I'd never been to one of these before. I went to Winchester a few months before that for a writing festival, but that wasn't crime. This was all crime in Harrogate. And I was in the lounge come bar in the middle of the afternoon. I was just standing there, and there was this chap next to me, and I was just kind of chatting to him, just saying, "How's your crime festival? Who have you seen? You're staying all weekend?" And Mark Lawson, author, and he does lots of interviews of the authors there, was interviewing. I can't remember who he's interviewing now, but he was interviewing another author. And then Mark Billingham, who was trying to give up cigarettes and was vaping, walked by in a cloud of vape and was just waved at us. And I thought, why is he waving at me? And then I turned and actually looked at the chap I was talking to, and it was Jeffrey Deaver. So it was Jeffrey Deaver, Mark Billingham waving at us, Mark Lawson, and this other author I can't remember. And I thought, this is a surreal moment. This is like being backstage at some kind of rock concert where you've suddenly met all these people that you're reading about, and they're not distant behind on some stage and out of your reach. They're next to you in the lounge bar chatting. So I mean, that was a fantastic moment, and but quite surreal. But I wasn't an author then, not quite.
And this year around, you got to meet our fantastic Barbara Norrie.
Barbara Norrie, yes, yeah. As you do these things, especially if you're on your own, you kind of sidle up to somebody, or even if there's a couple of people there who are kind of having a chat, you go up to them and say, "Oh, hello, how you doing, and how are you enjoying things?" And then you eventually get to say, "Are you an author, or are you writing anything at the moment? Are you aspiring, or are you just a reader?" So that conversation started off at breakfast. Not wanting to sit on my own again for another breakfast. I sidled up to Barbara's breakfast table, said hi, sat down, and of course, as soon as it was, I'm an author, she's a reader. Oh, you must join the UK Crime Book Club, and you must do this, and you must be interviewed, and what are you writing? And I didn't have any books with me because it wasn't that kind of festival for me. But I gave her a bookmark and said, do have a look and find out more about me, and hopefully, if you like it, read it, and if you like that, tell your friends. And almost immediately, after the festival, she was on saying, "I've told them about you. They want you to join. Go and join now." So yes, sometimes that's what I particularly, but others like me, need, is just a little push. So I knew about the kind of crime club on Twitter, and I kind of dipped in and out of the tweets there, but I hadn't seen it on Facebook. Didn't know all this wonderful stuff you do for promoting and spreading the word, for which I and many other authors are extremely grateful. But yeah, she's a lovely lady who has kind of become my champion now.
It's not a bad champion to have, I tell you. She is marvellous. Meeting her, and she was with Steve Munoz, who's one of our American members. It was one of my highlights of Harrogate.
All right.
It looks like I was completely mental because I just spotted them in the signing queue and screamed their names and hugged them across the little barrier things that there were there.
Well, I checked out a couple of your previous author interviews like this one, and saw that Martin Edwards was on early this week. So I missed half of that, unfortunately. I tuned into that, but he was very interesting, and he's a lovely guy. And I've got a lot of time for Martin because having joined the Crime Writing Association, he was putting together an anthology called Music of the Night, and the call went out, send in your stories, and I was fortunate to be one of those that had my story chosen, called The Watch Room. And of course, that's another authorial crime thing to tick off your list. You've been in a crime writing association anthology, and also it looks good on the CV as well when you do your author bio. But yeah, he's a lovely man, and so I shall. If you've got a kind of library of those, I shall be dipping back into those to have a look.
We do. We have a YouTube channel where we archive all of our author chats. We have done a lot of them.
Oh, that's a shame. That's this is going to be there for in perpetuity then. Oh dear.
It does, yeah. It lives on for you. We actually put it on the YouTube channel so authors can share it onto their websites and things.
Oh, okay, good. I'll do that.
It's the reason the YouTube channel exists, to make it a bit more shareable. We've got 4 minutes left, so
okay.
I want to just give everyone the potted bio of yourself and your books again. Maybe tell people where they can buy them, if they could buy signed copies from you, all that kind of good stuff.
Right, okay. So I'm Neil Daws, writing as N R Daws. My 2 books there behind me are A Quiet Place to Kill and A Silent Way to Die. Set in the Second World War with a detective and a female air transport auxiliary pilot. Book 3 coming out in February. Hope there'll be more, but we'll see. Where can you buy them? Anywhere you like. They are published by Thomas and Mercer, so going to Amazon is probably the easiest place to get it. You can get Kindle versions or paperback, or you can go into any bookshop you like and just say that's what you want, and they can order it from the Gardener's repository. So you don't have to go through Amazon. You can do it through an independent or Waterstones, and I sincerely hope that you like them, because I really enjoy writing crime. I love writing about the Second World War, and I love writing in general.
And then all that's left for me to say thanks for joining us.
And thank you for having me, and thank you for all the excellent questions.